of course welcome to keep your cameras off, and you can also edit your name as well in the team settings functions. So if you aren't comfortable to be recorded, you can of course leave if you wish. We will upload it online afterwards, so you can always view a copy of the presentation there. Note you might need to mute people if we get a lot of background noise during the session. So if you have any questions during the session, please use the Q&A function. There is a picture of it on the right-hand side of the slide. Note your name will be visible when you ask a question using the Q&A. If your connection is lost at all during the meeting, you can rejoin using the original invite details. And you can also sort of leave and rejoin if you're having any issues with other settings, for example, like renaming yourself. Any unanswered questions from today, we will make sure that we respond in writing, and we will upload a copy of all of the questions that were asked and the responses that we gave alongside the recording and the slides from today's session as well. So the image on the right-hand side of the slide also summarises how we'd like the session to run today. So the words in the central heart set out how we'd like attendees to feel during the session. So relaxed, respected, heard. And the words in the outer circle set out the ways that we can make the session a success. So critically, that will mean listening to each other and also those presenting to avoid jargon. But of course, you can ask in the Q&A for things to be clarified if things aren't clear at all. Next slide, please, Ian. So this is the agenda for the session today. So we will start by discussing what a waste plan is and why it needs updating, the policy requirements that it has to meet in order to be adopted, and the differences between the waste plan and the borough's waste strategy. So they will then have two question and answer sessions. So one will be focused on waste issues in East London, and then the other will look at sort of any comments or questions you have on the proposed approaches in the draft East London Joint Waste Plan. And then we'll end the session by discussing next steps and also set out how you can comment on the plan, and then we'll look to close at 7:30 sharp. Next slide, please, Ian. So the East London Waste Plan is mainly about how and where waste should be managed in East London. So the Joint Waste Plan can influence developments that require planning permission for new waste management sites in East London, the loss or alteration of any existing waste sites in East London, and also new developments where the end user will need to dispose of waste. So, for example, residential or commercial developments that contain bin storage. So we can help to encourage higher rates of waste reduction and recycling in these developments through good design and management requirements set out in the plan. However, there are things that the East London Waste Plan won't be able to address, so we can't influence problems with how household waste is collected by your borough. So, for example, it can't influence the frequency or types of collections that your borough undertakes. So these matters are dealt with by the waste teams in each of the East London boroughs, and there's some contact information and links to how you can look up more about these services and how you can contact the individual services in your boroughs on the slide. If you have any concerns about the operations of existing waste sites in your area, for example, noise and pollution, these matters are also best addressed by either contacting the environmental health teams in your local authority, or alternatively by contacting the Environment Agency, who issue the permits for the waste sites. Next slide. So this slide just lists the documents that are available to view on our consultation webpage. So alongside the main document that is the Joint Waste Plan, we also have a number of bits of evidence that have informed the drafting of the Joint Waste Plan. So this includes a document called the Integrated Impact Assessment and the Habitats Regulation Assessment. And these documents look at the potential impacts of the policies, for example, the impacts that may be had on protected characteristics, or perhaps the climate impacts from the Joint Waste Plan policies. We then also have topic papers on matters like climate change, as well as technical reports which look in more detail at the sites being safeguarded or released through the Joint Waste Plan. So you can view all of these documents on the consultation webpage. So if you're particularly interested in one of these topics and would like to know more about the approach in the Joint Waste Plan, then these documents are a really good place to find further information. Next slide. And at this point, I will hand over to Alan Potter, who works for BPP, who are the consultants that we've employed to help us draft the Joint Waste Plan.
Thank you for that, Claire, and good evening, everyone. I'll just be running through a kind of introduction on to waste management to hopefully bring everyone up to speed as to what the waste plan in particular will be addressing. So next slide, please, Ian. So this slide basically sets out the range of waste types that national planning policy for waste requires waste planning authorities such as each of the East London boroughs to plan for. And you'll see there's also a logo there for the East London Waste Authority, and that is responsible primarily for arranging the management of household waste in the 4 East London boroughs. Next slide, please. Okay, whilst waste collection is probably one of your council's most visible services, the facilities where our waste ends up being managed are often out of sight. Now, waste management facilities can range from your local household waste recycling centre, the tip, what we might know it as, through to vehicle breaking yards, and then major facilities like the mechanical biological treatment facilities provided under the contract with Elwa at Frog Island and Jenkins Lane within East London. And all of these facilities need to fit into an integrated network with waste, including materials destined for recycling, travelling on to a number of places for sorting and reprocessing along the way. Next slide, please. So what is a waste plan? Next slide, please. This essentially a waste local plan can be a standalone document like the proposed East London Joint Waste Plan, or included as policies within a local plan, as is the case with some London boroughs, such as, for example, Tower Hamlets. It can also be produced by individual boroughs or waste planning authorities, or by groupings, as is the case with the East London Joint Waste Plan. It includes policies used by the local council to determine planning applications for waste management facilities. It's different to the East London Joint Resources and Waste Strategy, which has been produced by the East London Waste Authority. It aims to ensure sufficient capacity to manage all of East London's waste to 2041. And it includes a vision, objectives and policies that address how waste should be managed in new development, and when and where additional waste management capacity will be supported. And this is planning applications. The East London Waste Plan was adopted in 2012, and that needs updating because there have been changes in national planning policy since then, and those acronyms are the National Planning Policy for Waste and the National Planning Policy Framework. So apologies for those acronyms. There's a more recent version of the London Plan, which was adopted in 2021, and we need to be consistent with updated local plans that have been produced by each of the boroughs that plan for other land uses in their boroughs. Next slide, please. This slide sets out what is called, the development plan for East London. And that is essentially the series of documents that any planning application is assessed against. And in the case of East London, we have the London Plan, which is the regional plan. Then we have, as outlined in red, the East London Joint Waste Plan, which is what this consultation is about. And we also have alongside that the borough local plans. In addition to those plans, there are other plans and strategies such as the London Environment Strategy and London Planning Guidance that form what are called material considerations, which would inform any decisions that are made by a planning authority on particular waste planning applications. Just as an aside, because you may also have an interest in the joint strategy for East London's waste resources and waste published by the East London Waste Authority. That sets out the aims, objectives, priorities and actions for the boroughs on preventing and reducing principally household waste, increasing reuse and recycling, supporting improvements with household waste management infrastructure and monitoring its performance. And that strategy covers a 30-year period through to 2057 to reflect the timing of the end of the East London Waste Authority's long-term integrated waste management services contract, which is to be let by the East London Waste Authority. Work is already underway to meet targets and ambitions set out in that document, and we actually have someone from East London Waste Authority on this call if you have some particular questions you'd like to ask of it. Next slide, please. So the plan needs to be consistent with the national policy and what the term is in general conformity with the London plan. So we have here, as referred earlier, the National Planning Policy Framework. We have the National Planning Policy for Waste, which sets out the need particularly to deal with the waste hierarchy and proximity principle. And then we have the London Plan, which has policies relating to waste management capacity and sets waste targets to include net self-sufficiency for London as a whole. Next slide, please. I mentioned on the previous slide the term the waste hierarchy, and this is a diagrammatic representation of that. Essentially, you start from the top and work your way down. That is essentially the first stage being using less materials and keeping products for longer in use so that actually waste is prevented from being produced. Then we have, if we have waste, that if we check, clean and repair any waste items, that those can be put back to use. If following that you're unable to undertake repair for reuse, then the materials can be recycled and or converted into compost if it's sort of organic materials such as garden waste. Then working down that side, we then have what's called other recovery facilities, which include facilities called anaerobic digestion, where food waste that's separated, collected, is subject to a process where methane is produced that can then be captured to produce energy. We also have incineration with energy recovery, where waste is burnt and used to generate steam that is used to generate electricity, and heat can be utilized. We have gasification and pyrolysis, which are more advanced thermal treatments. And also in the case of construction and demolition, excavation waste, which aren't suitable for digestion or incineration, they may be used for backfilling operations. And finally, at the bottom there, we have landfill and incineration without energy recovery. So compliance with the waste hierarchy in priority order is already a legal requirement under the Waste England and Wales Regulations 2011. And this means that anyone who holds, carries or manages waste ought to have checked that the waste is being managed in accordance with the hierarchy. And that means that if it can't be prevented, it's considered for reuse, or failing that, recycling or composting or other recovery before it is sent for disposal, which is really seen as the last resort option. The Environment Act 2021 required the government to set long-term legally binding targets, and those included those relating to resource efficiency and waste reduction. And in response to this requirement, the government has set the following targets in its Environmental Improvement Plan of 2023. That was the previous government. which build on existing recycling and landfill diversion targets. In particular, that's to eliminate avoidable waste by 2050, double resource productivity by 2050, explore options for the near elimination of biodegradable municipal waste being sent to landfill from 2028, eliminate avoidable plastic waste by 2042, seek to eliminate waste crime by 2042, and finally halve the amount of residual waste, which is the waste left over after recycling or reuse, produced per person by 2042. And for the purpose of that target, residual waste is defined as waste that is sent to landfill or incinerators or is sent overseas to be used in energy recovery. Next slide, please, Ian. Now, at the same time as the planning system operating, and that focuses on establishing if a proposed use of the land and the possible impacts of those uses is acceptable in principle. This is rather than the day-to-day pollution control. And this generally is applied by the Environment Agency under an environmental permit that regulates the day-to-day operation of waste management facilities. And the assumption or expectation in national planning policy is that decisions relating to planning applications for waste management facilities should assume that those other regulatory regimes will operate effectively. Next slide, please. Now, there are regional requirements set through the London Plan, and the latest version of that is 2021. We've been advised that the London Plan is actually undergoing review at the moment, and there will be a consultation around that. That introduces the concept of the circular economy into policy. It also sets targets of zero biodegradable or recyclable waste going to landfill by 2026. 65% of municipal waste recycling by 2030, 95% of construction and demolition waste being reused, recycled or recovered, and 95% of excavation waste going for beneficial use. And where that excavation waste is inert, the expectation that all of that will go for beneficial use. And it also introduces the idea of net self-sufficiency, which looks to ensure that the equivalent quantity of 100% of London's waste is managed within London by 2026. It also requires that existing waste sites in London are safeguarded from other development. It provides what we call apportionments of household, industrial and commercial waste for each London borough to plan for. It includes criteria for new and the expansion of existing waste sites, and it requires identification of sites to meet requirements where there is a capacity gap identified and needed. Next slide, please, Ian. So on the London Plan apportionments, which essentially is how much household, industrial and commercial waste we need to plan for, these are the individual tonnages that are set out in the London Plan 2021, apportioned to each of the boroughs. And you can see at the bottom of that table the total. So we've got about 1.5 million tonnes of household, commercial, industrial waste, which might generally be known as municipal waste per annum, needing to be planned for. And an assessment of capacity to promote the recovery of that waste in East London indicates there's around about 2.5 million tonnes per annum of capacity. In addition to that, we have around about 2.1 million tonnes per annum of waste from construction activities, with an assessed capacity of around about 3.8 million tonnes per annum. And plus we have about 54,000 tonnes per annum of hazardous waste, with an assessed capacity of around 39,000 tonnes per annum. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a diagram of what I referred earlier to a circular economy and the London Plan introducing that as a policy requirement. And this is essentially how a circular economy might work. It's essentially moving away from what's largely a traditional linear economy where we make products, we use them, and then we simply dispose of them. And the idea is to attempt to keep resources in use for as long as possible, extract the maximum value from them whilst they are in use, and then recover and regenerate products and materials at the end of their service life. And the implications for this from the point of view of this waste plan, which is dealing with the spatial distribution of waste management facilities, is that more storage of materials may be needed pending reuse and repair, and that may require additional facilities or the possible expansion of capacity at existing facilities in the short to medium term. Next slide, please, Ian. This is an example of what can happen if waste management facilities are not properly provided for. So the key purpose, or a key purpose of waste planning, is to provide for waste management facilities to ensure waste is managed safely, minimizing risks to human health and the environment, including the consideration of climate change impacts. So you're ahead there, Ian. And this is an example of what can happen when facilities are not provided. And we can also see how quickly waste can build up on the streets when waste collection services don't operate effectively, attracting scavengers such as foxes and vermin. This particular photo is one of relating to Mexico, where a decision was made to close the garbage dump without proper planning of what alternatives might be available. Next slide, please. This graph shows essentially the municipal waste recycling target that's set in the London Plan. For London as a whole, that's to achieve 65% municipal waste recycling from 2030 onwards. And the graph shows that if that target is met, then only 35% of the remaining municipal waste, which is referred to as residual waste, would require management through other means. And for East London, that would generally mean through other recovery facilities, such as energy from waste plants, currently outside East London. Very little household waste is actually sent to landfill these days, around about 118 tonnes in 2022-23. Next slide, please. Okay, this is now setting out the information that's included in the evidence base relating to the assessment of the need for waste management capacity in East London. So an assessment of existing waste management capacity has been undertaken, and essentially when the amounts of waste forecast to be produced over the planned period are compared with the amounts of recovery capacity already provided at existing waste management facilities in East London, we find the following surpluses and deficits. So we've got apportioned waste. This is the household, industrial, commercial waste. We have a surplus of at least 680,000 tonnes per annum, or as much as 1.1 million tonnes per annum. The 680,000 tonnes per annum relates to a sensitivity that was done to check if the possible loss of the mechanical biological treatment facilities that are currently provided under the ELWA contract, if they were no longer operational when the ELWA contract is re-let. For construction, demolition and excavation waste, around about 1.7 million tonne per annum surplus. For hazardous waste, just under 60,000 tonne per annum shortfall. Now, in the case of that shortfall, because national and regional policy does not expect individual plan areas such as East London to be self-sufficient in hazardous waste management capacity, This is due to the range of waste captured by the term and the need for facilities to be of a minimum size to achieve economies of scale to be viable, and therefore this deficit is not considered critical to meeting the needs of East London, and reliance on facilities outside in London, East London in some cases, is proposed. However, if an operator was to propose providing a facility in East London to deal with certain hazardous wastes, any planning application would be assessed against the policies in the proposed plan, and such a facility would also need to gain an environmental permit from the Environment Agency. Next slide, I think the last one for me. This slide shows the kind of, you might see the flip side, where there is a concern about the possible encroachment on the existing waste sites. So as well as controlling the development of waste management facilities, the draft plan seeks to control other development that may encroach on the operation of those existing waste management facilities to prevent their capacity being restricted. And the National Planning Policy Framework refers to this as the agent of change principle, where a proposer of a development within the vicinity of a facility would need to ensure the new development is properly designed so that it doesn't have an adverse effect on the day-to-day operation of that facility, and also that day-to-day operation of that facility doesn't have an adverse effect on the occupiers of the new development. Next slide, please. So we invite at this stage any questions. What do you think? This is principally the residents or people who've joined the call. And when we're planning for waste management, what might you think we need to consider? What problems are there with the way waste may be currently managed? And is there anything else we need to be thinking about? And please add any of questions relating to those points in the Q&A box of the Teams call. But otherwise, thanks for your attention, and I'll pass over to Ian.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Yeah, really good explanation of what we're into when we're talking about waste management, what waste planning is all about, and especially in relation to what's going on in East London. Just to say, with these questions here that you've got up in front of you, if there's nothing to discuss at the moment, there is plenty of opportunity to go through the plan at your leisure and the documentation, as Claire indicated at the start of the session, and you can make comments and ask questions via the consultation portal. But Claire will talk more about that at the end of the session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what does the East London Joint Waste Plan say. So how are we've talked about all of these issues, and we need to recycle more, we need to reduce waste. We're concerned about maybe existing capacity being lost. So how are we going to make sure that when land use proposals for housing, proposals for waste management sites, how do they ensure that all of those things don't become a problem? And in fact, we make the best of the situation. So basically, very briefly, and this is what I'm going to do, is give you a sort of a flavour for the policies that are in the plan, rather than go through them in great detail. But essentially, our overarching approach is set out on this slide. So to start with, what we're anticipating is that waste that's produced during the construction and occupation of a development is minimised, reused and recycled. So that's all forms of development. So any kind of development that comes forward for a proposal as a planning application, we will be, the boroughs, when they receive those applications, will be looking to ensure that the best job is done to ensure that the waste that's produced from the operation of that, from the occupation of that development, the waste that's produced during the construction, during any demolition that takes place, is managed principally in accordance with the waste hierarchy, which Alan has already explained. So we're looking to prevent it, reuse it, recycle it, and then, and only then, if we can't do any of those things, look to recover it, and then finally dispose of it. But that really shouldn't be necessary. There's plenty of options now to manage waste at the top of the hierarchy, and so that's what the planners will be looking for when proposals come forward. So the next thing is to safeguard existing waste management capacity. There is a lot of pressure on land in East London, as Alan indicated, for development. And so what we find is that people are coming forward with proposals to redevelop the existing waste management sites. They're saying, well, we'd rather actually get rid of this waste management site and put some housing here instead. Now, we know we need housing, of course, but we also need waste management facilities. They're doing a really important job. And so if we just allow that to happen, we'll end up with no waste management facilities in East London. It'll all be transported outside of the area with all the associated transport and impacts that would involve. So what we're looking to do is safeguard existing waste management capacity in the majority of cases, and I'll show you the policy. I'll talk a little bit more about the policy that is seeking to do that. We will allow a development of new capacity at existing sites. So if you've got an existing waste management site, the policy is looking to encourage expansion or a greater throughput, or indeed moving waste up the hierarchy. So if we're looking to change from waste being managed in a way which is further down the hierarchy to one which is further up the hierarchy, then that would be encouraged. Excuse me. So we don't want to allow the development of new waste sites for waste management. We simply don't need any more. That's our position. Alan's gone through the data and showed you that we have this surplus, quite a significant surpluses of capacity, of waste management capacity in East London. And so simply put, on the face of it, we don't need lots of new waste management capacity in East London. But we recognise that in certain circumstances, facilities proposals will come forward, and actually they would maybe do a better job than the facilities that are there at the moment. They're in a good location, and so we would want those to come forward. And so there's policy in the plan which would allow that to happen. And finally, we are looking to ensure that any waste management facility that is developed, any new capacity that is developed, is designed in a way that protects and enhances communities in the natural environment. So there's a whole policy, with a whole list of things that developers need to take into account to make sure that the proposals aren't impacting the environment, are benefiting the environment and local communities as well. Now, I'm going to go into a bit more detail now of the 6 policies that are in the East London Joint Waste Plan. So we've got circular economy, safeguarding and provision of waste capacity, prevention of encroachment, design, energy from waste, and deposit of waste on land. So to start with, circular economy. Alan has explained what the circular economy is about. Basically, what we're looking to do is ensure that new development comes forward in accordance with circular economy principles. So it's not just about ensuring that waste which arises from construction and demolition of a new development is managed, is recycled, or is diverted away from landfill in some way. We're also looking to see that development is coming forward in an efficient way. So land is being used efficiently, existing development is being used efficiently. So in the case of new developments, we may be asking, well, is there an existing development elsewhere which would do a good enough job? So we don't actually need to take up resources, to take up space to meet the needs that this development would meet. So can we redevelop, repurpose an existing development for the same reason? So that's kind of like right at the top of our thinking, I suppose. So then when we get into the design of the development, we're looking at ensuring that materials being used are maybe recycled, that the development can be, when it comes to the end of its life, it can be taken apart in a way which means that the component parts can easily be reused. So it's built in sections and then can be taken apart in sections. The actual, the interior of the building is designed in a way which means that it can be used flexibly. So where you've got an office block, for example, the interior walls can easily be moved around, so you can move the size of the offices and things like that to keep things as flexible as possible. So then when we're looking at how the waste is managed, which comes from the occupation of the building. So we're ensuring that is stored and collected in a way which ensures that management of waste is occurring as far up the hierarchy as possible. So ensuring that the building has been designed with facilities to make sure that waste can be separated, that waste can be recycled, and waste can be properly collected, to ensure that can occur effectively and efficiently. In the past, there's been a massive problem where there's been insufficient storage, and the waste collection authorities are just left with having to take it all away in one truck. There's no opportunity for separating waste out that would facilitate recycling. So that's what we're looking for. And you've got some examples there in the picture on the left-hand side, which is actually a sophisticated vacuum system. One of the few of those exists in the Barking Riverside development in Barking and Dagenham, I think we're proud to say. So moving on to the next policy, safeguarding and provision of waste capacity. There's two parts to this policy. The first part talks about safeguarding, and I mentioned what safeguarding is all about. And it's really setting out the principle that waste management sites should not be redeveloped except in exceptional circumstances. And it explains what those circumstances are. To say that what we have established, as Alan has already alluded to, is there is a surplus of waste capacity in East London. And so what that has allowed us to do is to look at whether there are existing waste management sites that could actually be released from safeguarding. So where we would remove that safeguarding protection away from those existing waste sites. And what we found is that there's 5 sites in Barking and Dagenham, and there's 2 in Newham that we propose for what we call a release from safeguarding. So what that means is if they're no longer safeguarded, then someone could come along and propose those waste sites to be redeveloped for another type of use, such as housing. The reason that those sites have been chosen is particularly to do with the fact that the Barking and Dagenham and Newham are developing local plans which include proposals for land uses which aren't compatible or are different to those which are existing in those areas, and they would be better suited for redevelopment and regeneration. So in terms of the provision of waste capacity, so this is how we are looking to provide for waste capacity, new waste capacity. So full utilisation of existing capacity. So we do that by ensuring that existing sites are operating at maximum capacity before we allow new sites. And then expanding, reconfiguring existing sites, as I said, and then only allowing brand new sites in exceptional circumstances. So the types of location where those new sites could come forward are specified in the plan. And we're looking to strategic industrial locations, local industrial locations, and then in a kind of like a hierarchy of preference there, and then other locations such as previously developed land. So moving on to policy JWP3, which is about the encroachment issue and addressing the encroachment issue. So as we develop more and more, we develop our urban areas, become more and more densely developed. what we find is, as Alan indicated, we get uses which are really not compatible potentially coming forward, and we want to avoid that. We want to avoid waste management facilities being faced with having to modify their operations, or maybe reduce their operations because a housing development has come forward right next door to them. So we need to make sure that this is considered carefully before any neighbouring development comes forward, which could limit or hinder the operation of an existing waste management site. And in that regard, as Alan explained, the agent of change principle applies. And so that means that the developer making the application for the non-waste development next to a waste management site has to think about what they would do to ensure that there wouldn't be an issue caused by being next to the waste management site. And so in the slides that Alan showed, there were some noise screens and some visual screens that had been put up by the developer to minimise the impact from the adjacent site. Moving on to JWP4, design of waste management facilities. This is going into the detail of ensuring that a waste management facility, when it's proposed, would not impact unacceptably on the local environment and on host communities. So we're looking to ensure that the facility is designed in a way it includes mitigation measures, which will mean we don't get issues of things like noise, dust, odour. One of the key things we do is we ask for the vast majority of waste management facilities to be developed in a building. So all waste management activity would take place within a building. It's as simple as that. So if somebody came forward with a planning application saying, well, I'm going to store a load of waste and process a load of waste outside, this policy would apply and say, no, you're not. If that's what you're proposing, you're not going to get planning permission. We want to see that you're going to properly control the impacts from this facility on the environment and on local communities. Other point just to draw your attention to there is around transport. So this is ensuring that the movement of waste from HGVs going in and out of sites, which do have potential to create some significant transport impacts, that those are controlled. For example, by ensuring that waste movements only take place a certain day, there's only a certain number of movements allowed in a day. Climate change and mitigation adaptation is also key. So as far as adaptation is concerned, we're ensuring that this is not going to, a new waste management facility is not going to exacerbate flood risk, for example. And we are, looking to ensure that runoff from a site will not create further problems elsewhere, which is especially important adjacent to the River Thames, which some of the areas of East London are. So energy from waste, we've got a particular policy about energy from waste, and the reason for this, we're not actually expecting energy from waste, an energy from waste facility to be developed during the plan period. It has to be said. We've looked at how much surplus capacity there is in the area. And no proposals are coming forward. Nobody is suggesting that they would like to build an energy from waste plant in East London, but nevertheless, it may happen. And we need to make sure that we have considered the particular elements that are associated with energy from waste facilities in any proposal, and that we are able to address them and ensure that such a facility would come forward in a way which was appropriate. So fundamentally, again, talking about the waste hierarchy, we would only allow an energy from waste facility if it was to manage residual waste. So that's waste left over from recycling, reuse, all those other types up the waste hierarchy. We want to see the maximum amount of energy produced, so that's most likely going to involve a district heating network included, so the surplus energy that's produced can be used to heat homes and businesses. And also electricity would be produced on site from the burning of the waste. we want to see recycling of the ash, and we want to see carbon being captured, carbon emissions captured at such a facility. So those are particular aspects which really relate only to energy from waste, and hence we've got a policy specifically about that type of waste management. Similarly, another type of waste management which has particular issues which we need to ensure are addressed is landfill or deposit of waste on land. So we're calling it deposit of waste on land because waste is disposed of not just by filling holes in the ground, it's sometimes disposed of by creating mounds on the basic level of the ground, and so you effectively creating small hills. So that would be a land raise activity, but yeah, typically it's landfill. So what we would expect is that any proposal for a landfill site is demonstrating that only waste which cannot be managed in accordance with the waste hierarchy, further a waste hierarchy, is being managed in this way. So any developer would have to demonstrate that there's a particular type of waste which can only be managed by landfill, and it can't be recovered, it can't be incinerated, it can't be recycled, can't be reused. So there are particular impacts of landfill, and such as the production of leachate, which is potentially a polluting liquid, which, if it's not properly controlled, can cause problems with groundwater, and also the production of methane gas, which is flammable, but it's also a greenhouse gas. So we want to make sure those are properly managed, and we include conditions in the policy which will ensure that those things are properly considered in proposals. And we will also want to see that a landfill, once it's finished, is properly restored, and that there is proper aftercare arrangements in place. Also, just to say, we can't see that inert waste ever needs to be disposed of. There is always a use for it. It can always be used as an engineering material, it can always be used in restoration of land. And so we would not accept proposals if that were not being proposed. So if it was being proposed for disposal, then that would not be acceptable. So that's a quick run through, a quick flavour of the policies in the East London Joint Waste Plan. I hope that's helpful. Time for some questions, comments, reflections. And if there aren't any,
there's nothing in the Q&A.
Okay, so it's over to Claire, I think. Claire, are you going to wrap?
Yeah. Do you want to put me onto the next slide?
Yeah.
And the next one. So this slide just sets out the next steps in terms of the preparation of the waste plan. So the current consultation that we're holding at the moment, that the consultation period runs until the end of the day on the 16th of September. We'll then spend a period of time processing all of the comments that we receive on the joint waste plan, and then we will use these comments to help inform the quote-unquote sort of final draft of the plan. And this draft of the plan will be the version of the plan that we look to submit to the Secretary of State, where it will be formally examined, and there may be a need for hearings and then further modifications to the plan if the inspector that the Secretary of State appoints considers that there are things that need to be changed in the document. And then with that timetable, we'd be looking at adoption of the Joint Waste Plan around summer 2026. Next slide. So as discussed in a previous slide, we have the evidence-based documents that you can review on our consultation webpage if you're interested in a particular topic or point of discussion from today's session. We also have our consultation protocol available on our consultation webpage as well, which is an explanation of how we've approached consultation on the waste plan, how we've notified people, what we've put up on the project website, events like this one that you've attended today, and then also the community drop-ins that we're hosting in the boroughs. So we've still got a number of those to go. So if you're interested in discussing further with planners in your local area, we're hosting one in Newham tomorrow, but there are other drop-ins happening in the borough over any other boroughs over the course of the consultation period. Next slide. So we've got a link on this slide where you can view all the relevant documents and where you can also provide comments on the consultation. There's a questionnaire that you can fill out on the web page to provide your comments. Or alternatively, you can see at the bottom of the slide, we have an email address set up for this consultation. So if you'd rather put your comments in email, you can send them to that email address, eljointwasteplan@havering.gov.uk. And just a reminder that comments need to be submitted by no later than 11:59 p.m. on Monday, the 16th of September. Next slide. So yeah, I'll sort of close by sort of offering up a final opportunity to ask any questions. But yeah, just to say a big thank you for attending today. And we're going to look to put up the recording of this session on the consultation webpage. So if there are any points that you'd like to go back and re-listen to, or if you want to point any colleagues or friends in the direction of this presentation, then you can do so via the consultation webpage. But yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll sort of keep a quick eye on the Q&A, but if not, I think we can draw the session to a close.